You're listening to Your Rivers Are Wrong, the podcast. My name is Merle, I'm here with my good friend Dante, and we're here to build worlds and tell their stories. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Hey, hello, and welcome back to the Your Rivers Are Wrong podcast. I'm Dante, one of your hosts for today.
Yeah, and I'm also here. My name's Merle. Yeah.
You're also here.
I'm also here. This is how we podcast from now on.
Good to have you here. Good to have you here. Yeah. Today, we're coming off of a nice holiday weekend. If you at home are watching this at any other time of the year and you're not coming off a holiday weekend, well, Christmas is less than 12 months away, I'm sure.
Great.
Yeah. Did you do anything special this weekend? Okay. I had a question for you. I heard something about 3 days of Christmas lunch, and I need to know what that's about.
Okay. I might have mistakenly put you on the wrong train of thought there, but what the idea was, there's a lot of family that I have to visit each Christmas, or that I want to visit. Let's be nice about it. I also am nice about it. Like, don't get me wrong. But
well,
usually that means that we have
people.
like third day of Christmas. You know what I mean? Which is not a thing, but then it feels like that because we do Christmassy things anyway, because we have more family than we have days of Christmas. You know what I mean?
Okay, so this is not like a national thing. This is just like
No. Oh, I wish it was,
okay.
though. That would be great.
I totally thought it was
Let's just like put that in the universe for a sec. Yeah, okay. No,
I totally thought
wish
this was like a cultural thing. Yeah. Okay,
No.
cool.
But I think in Holland you do have, like, is it true that in America or in maybe any other country that you don't have a second day of Christmas? Or is this like a thing that I'm making up?
We don't really celebrate. We have Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. We don't really celebrate the 26th.
Okay, so that is a national thing. We have like 2 official days of Christmas and then Christmas Eve before that.
Well, Canada
there you
has
go.
Boxing Day. Canada has Boxing Day on the 26th. Which I just
Boxing
learned
Day?
about.
What's that?
Yeah, it's like
Is it Christmas?
the way to. I'm not
Is
a
it
Canadian, so
Christmas adjacent? Oh, okay.
if there's any future Canadian watchers here, feel free to clarify Boxing Day for me.
Yeah,
but I
please.
think it's just
Don't take our word.
it's the equivalent of Black Friday, but after Christmas.
Ah. Oh, okay. Like all the Christmas sale that didn't get sold, they'll just
Something
box it
like
out
that, yeah.
on Boxing Day. Oh.
Yeah, but I feel like you should just buy
I
your
like that.
presents. Yeah, you should just buy your presents like after Thanksgiving, so you can have them for for Christmas or whatever.
I guess so. Yeah. It was quite funny actually talking about presents because we were having like a nice dinner at my mom's, and then my roommate came too, and my brother and his girlfriend, and we didn't think of or decide before we actually met that we wanted to do presents because we also have other holidays. So sometimes in Holland you don't do presents, only just have like a nice family time during Christmas. And now we all just brought a bunch of presents. Like every time a guest came in, we were like, oh yeah, actually I did buy some presents. And then eventually we just had like a super big pile of packaging there. It was really nice.
Okay, that's awesome.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Also, something I wanted to bring up because I didn't catch it. I was kind of panicking the first recording. I'm going to be honest with you. I did not have my mind straight. You said something along the lines of that you don't have a YouTube, but you do. It's just that you don't advertise.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's true. Yeah. I thought of that too afterwards. And then I'm like, well, it's in there now. No, it's true.
You said that and there was like a really long, awkward pause. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to say something here. But I just completely blanked. I was
It's funny because
focused.
I did mean it, but it's like I just don't think of it as a thing that I do officially or something, because it's really just sort of barfing out covers that I feel like I have to like put anywhere, otherwise I will forget they exist. So that's how I feel about it, you know?
It's really good barf though.
Well,
I'm just going to be clear.
Thanks. That's nice.
Okay.
I'll
Just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah. Good. Oh, what do you call that? Like officially, like errata? Is that a thing? Yeah. We can do this like every new episode where we're like, oh, by the way, what we said in the last one was really wrong. Let's clarify.
let me just course correct real
Yeah.
quick.
Probably like in the next episode, we'll have like some Canadians being angry at us, and we're like, hey, this week's errata is about Boxing Day, and how we probably like misunderstood everything about that day.
We've entirely
go.
lost our Canadian listener base.
Yep.
Thanks
Which
to
we
our
have.
comment on Boxing Day, and we deeply apologize.
Yeah. Sorry, Canada.
Sorry, Canada. Anyway, moving on to what you're probably here for.
Oh yeah, we had a podcast about world building.
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
we've got a new format we're testing out, new episode, new format.
Yes.
Both of us have brought a different topic to the table today about world building, whether it be like an idea, a genre, a piece of creative media, or just a discussion topic to like hash out. But we haven't told each other what that is. So I'm actually really excited to find out what we're talking about today. Merle, I think you're kicking us off, right?
Oh, I will. Okay. Here's my thing. I thought about this because I did a drawing last week, or a painting, I should say. And then I started out with like this is a long like story to lead up to our actual topic, but hear me out.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good.
In painting, sometimes you have to think of it as a sculpture, like a blob of color. And then you sort of start adding in shadows and light, like you're sort of sculpting out sort of your form on the paper, which is very abstract and stuff. But as I was doing that, because it takes a while, and painting is really nice to do in a sort of very slow state of mind, I feel, side note. But I was thinking about sort of the difference in defining things in terms of sort of details that you add to it. And that got me thinking in terms of world building about the thing that you often hear like every now and then in other world building podcasts or in like literature or in D&D maybe even, I'm not sure, where they talk about sort of the top-down approach versus the bottom-up approach. And this usually talks about the idea of should you flesh out your entire planetary system first and then go smaller and smaller and smaller and then end up in your, street where the player characters start out, or where your main character from your novel or anything, can be any medium, begins their journey? Or do you start the other way, where you don't know anything about the sort of grand scope of things in your world or universe or anything yet, and you just start with, okay, the street looks like this, or the school looks like this. And then as the story progresses, or as you, keep developing your idea and your world, you sort of add to it because you need those parts. And maybe, again, another D&D example is quite useful here, because usually the player characters start in one location and then eventually they end up maybe in another city, or they start traveling because they need somewhere, or they need a certain material up a mountain in the north or something. And then as a DM, or as someone that makes the world for that story, you can then think of, okay, if they gotta go to this mountain, then I need to know what this mountain is about.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the other way is that sometimes if you start very vague and then you just add specific details, like you just have one piece of, I don't know, maybe you see like a poster in a street somewhere about people being recruited for a war or something, and you as the world builder has no idea what that war is yet, but then still the detail's already there, and it makes it feel like a sort of grander scope of things or scheme of things, And I just think it's interesting to sort of start the discussion. Well, firstly, I'm interested in sort of how you do it, or if you have a certain way that you approach this stuff, because of course you do D&D, but I can assume you also have other worlds in the making, or in the back of your mind, or other stories maybe. And if it changes per story, yeah.
Okay, so full disclosure here, I may or may not have brought the same topic.
Oh, okay.
Which is fine. We can either...
We'll have a deep dive. That'll be fine.
Or I could just bring up something later that's different. But that is really funny, because I absolutely spent a lot of time thinking about this too.
Oh, great. Well, it'll make for an interesting discussion anyway then.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to approach this. And one of the most important things is that it changes per medium. So if we want to compare like a book, obviously, writing a book versus having a campaign setting for a game of a tabletop RPG. The thing is that in a book, if you flesh out a city or a town or a village, if you don't want your main character to ask about the infrastructure of the city's agriculture, it'll never come up. But with players, you never really know what they're interested in,
That's right. Yeah.
You could set up a town and you can prepare it as much as you want, but there's absolutely no way to prepare to know how much exactly you have to prepare for what they'll be curious in, because what they're interested in is kind of a discovery process. And one of the biggest things about being a dungeon master that comes with time and practice is not preparing too much, because there's a good chance that a lot of your prep work just kind of falls to the wayside. I think the best way to approach this topic at first is kind of to set up anecdotes about how we started our first campaigns, like the first setting that you ever made, the first village or the first town, what that looks like. Because I remember pretty darn vividly.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, I'm very curious now.
Okay, so my friends approached me to play D&D, and I didn't know what that was. And they're like, "Can you dungeon master for us?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Let me figure out what that means."
Nice.
So we started with just a bunch of printouts from online about the basic rules of D&D. We had no adventure modules, no campaign setting books, none of that, because I didn't even know if I wanted to drop money on it yet. So it fell onto my shoulders initially. The initial responsibility to world build fell into my hands. And I'm just like, okay, so I decided just to write an entire setting and adventure from scratch. So I'm like, okay, so how do these things usually start?
No
It's always like,
stuff.
oh, you start in a pattern. Yeah. So for me, I started with something as small as I could. So for me, it was a tavern. Of course, you mean a tavern. So where is this tavern? Yeah. It's in a little village. Where is this little village? Somewhere probably far away from everything else, so I don't have to flesh out everything else, So what's interesting about D&D is that, well, actually, in all of world building, now that we talk about it, is that world building, or the purpose of world building in most scenarios, is to set up a story, right? Like, what's the point of creating this whole universe if there's not going to be a story told because of it?
It's also a storytelling device, I would even say.
Yeah, of course.
It's not just sort of the place where a story takes place, but it's also actually the story.
Yeah, and just kind of exploring that space and slowly widening as part of the process.
Exactly.
So I needed a way to start a story. That was my biggest thing. I needed a place where a story could happen. So I'm like, okay, so what is something like unique about this little town that doesn't have a name yet? They have pigs. They have pigs. They have boars. They have pigs and boars, and they're blue. These boars are blue. And that was actually the start of my campaign.
I love it. That's great.
I just had to give them something interesting. So they come into this town. There's like a boar hunting contest. And all the boars are blue, which is just because they eat blue fruit from blue trees. That's got to be it. Sure, let's write that down. So why is this a story? Well, the first thing that clued them into something was wrong was that I introduced a red boar.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh,
okay.
Well, that's weird because the world kind of has already told me that boars are blue. So something about this is strange. And as they delved into it, they figured out something was wrong with the boar, and they figured out the source of that. And that led into a story. So,
gotcha.
So the setting or the world building for me was out of necessity. I needed something that would kick off a story, establish what was the norm, and then break off of that.
Right. Yeah.
And that's kind of how that all fell into place. Now, the name of the continent, the cities around it, the mountains, the regions and the wars and the history, that didn't exist. Like when I started playing D&D and I ran this story, I didn't know the world. But boy, did I, after like a year of continually having to make sessions and more stories.
That's so relatable.
That process eventually expands. It's like you have to start thinking about, especially in D&D, which is very important. The players have their own characters, and every character has a backstory. So when a character has a backstory and they mention a town or a village or a place or something that happened to them, like a conflict or a battle or a schism, that has to take place in your world, right? So you have to make room for that.
Yeah.
Some people, some DMs like to create the world first, or just the general idea of it, like vague pieces of land, give it to their players and be like, hey, you can choose any of these places to come from, and I'll flesh out the world as needed based on your backstory. Some DMs just ask their players for just vague backstories. And then in post, right before the first session, they'll tell them, okay, so you're from this country. These are the details from that. You're from this country. These are the details of that. I literally just watched a video on this yesterday because I was looking for like references and stuff. But a good process is kind of to bounce between the two bullet points of world building and story, then back to world building, then back to story, and kind of zigzagging between the two and watching the world flesh out from that point. Does that make sense? Do you kind of follow a similar thing, or is this something completely different from what you do?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I was thinking specifically the backstory thing is interesting because I feel that's sort of a weird mechanic in D&D where you sort of, because usually the way the game works, the sort of whole point of the game is that you sort of flesh out story together as you go, as you talk and as you game. But then backstory is as if you're making up previous sessions. So it has to feel like that, even though, people write different or people have different sort of aesthetics or sort of feels for their story or their character in mind. So I do really like that sort of puzzle that's going on there before you actually start playing, because there's a really sort of nice balance going on that you have to, find, I would say, between like the vibe of one person's character that's maybe super, I don't know, natural or witch based. I'm just saying random stuff right now. And someone else who's super into, I don't know, maybe dark stuff, more like demon. I don't know. D&D is of course very useful for that part, so people do that too. And then if those things happen in the same game, in the same sort of storyline, you have to sort of find a way to nicely mix them. And I think that's specifically because backstories are just suddenly there. You didn't spend time storytelling them as you would do it in like your actual storyline that you're doing in your game. I think that's a really nice sort of pre-mechanic or something to D&D that I also quite like. And I would say for how I approached my homebrew setting for the game that I'm running now for my roommates and my brother and friends is a little bit of both. I would say that I did, just for the record, I started there with a sort of pre-made one-shot that lasted not one but like 4 sessions as things do in D&D. Yep, no surprise. Well, I mean, I was surprised then, and now I'm like, nope, that's how everything happens all the time.
There's no way to predict when they decide to spend 3 hours with the innkeeper,
Nope, exactly. This is one of the most important things to discuss maybe in one of our first episodes. This is how D&D works. But yeah, I started there with a sort of pre-made one-shot. It was a really good one, by the way. It's called, I'm not sure if I can remember. Lights Out at the Lighthouse or something. I'm not sure. I'll try to find it. And it was actually funny because my brother is super into lighthouses, and I was like, yeah, let's go. We're gonna do a lighthouse one shot.
What a really
and I really wanted to hook. I really wanted to hook him because I was so obsessed, and I was like, I would love for you to love this too. So there you go. Anyway, but I started with a one shot, and then eventually sort of, as you do with adventure hooks, you sort of start with a pre-made module, and then you sort of gradually change it to your own stuff and your own makings. And that's how we sort of evolve now, or how we sort of transferred from the pre-made stuff to what I'm doing now. So from that one shot, I got like a little town with a nice lighthouse. And, that was like a small, very compact modular setting that I could just have there. But then I did feel the need to have some sort of overarching idea of what was going on, or idea of what I would find important in the world that I feel like I can't talk about too much because I feel like these people also want to listen to this podcast.
Might listen.
Yeah, so I'm going to be a bit careful there. But I think it's really nice to have some sort of, and it can be as vague as possible, like some sort of vague idea of how, for example, countries feel about each other, or why this city feels this way. And then from there, I notice in my own ways of preparing that sometimes I accidentally come across a bigger concept where I'm like, ooh, what if these 3 cities have something in common with each other, or they are on sort of thin ice with each other, and then it's completely unnecessary for the actual session that I'm preparing at the moment. But I'm like, that triggered something, and then that does kind of exist in a sort of bigger context. So for me, I would feel that I do it quite similar the way that you do, in the way that like, okay, if my players want to go somewhere else, then I will flesh out that somewhere else. And that's how the world gets bigger, right? But on the side, there's also the sort of vague, grander scheme of things that I can also link stuff to, which is really nice. Because if you have a certain backstory, or if you have a certain adventure hook that you're following, then it's nice to sort of figure out a way that all those smaller stories can connect to one sort of bigger framework, even though the framework might not even be in focus yet, but then just a hint of it, which is also, again, the detailing that I was talking about, is really effective, or something to make it feel like a larger thing, even though you're also, as the story or as the world builder, still, fleshing out what that actually means. So I think it's, for me at least, it's very useful to have some sort of bigger thing going on in the, in the shadow, but it doesn't have to be, I wouldn't be able to like Tolkien style, like flesh out the entire thing and then just allow people to live in that or something, because it also feels a bit like godlike or something. I don't know if you have I don't know if you feel the same way, but I also feel like the more I flesh out, also the stricter I get for my players, or the stricter I get for myself, that I have to have this info right that they suddenly ask about or something, and it also makes it less free for me, or more stressful to actually get my own world right. Totally you know agree. What I mean? Which is quite, ironic.
So one of the biggest things in D&D, and this has not changed from like the first month I was playing to literally right now, as I prep for the next session happening over the weekend, the world you create on day 1 of your D&D campaign is not the same as the world you have a year later. Like ideas that you wanted to, like overarching themes that you wanted to stick to, continents and countries and things that you expected to play out rarely ever play out exactly as you imagine.
Do you have a specific example in mind? Oh, maybe you were saying that.
Oh, yeah. So,
tell me about it.
Oh, boy. So, in the most recent campaign that I'm running for 4 of my friends, if you're listening to this, shout out. I kind of had an idea to... Well, actually, we should probably start from the top. I kind of pitched an idea based around the 4 elements. I'm a big fan of the Avatar.
Yeah.
And just playing with that. One of my players wanted to play with a robot type character. And I'm like, okay, well, that's a little tricky to reconcile into the story, but let's go with it. Let's see where this goes. So the campaign started. He has this being forged of like a wooden stone, kind of to fit the more nature-ish setting. And his backstory was kind of on the back burner for a little over a year now. Like, we just didn't talk about where he came from. And as I got more comfortable with the setting and more comfortable with the characters and where we were headed, it was only then where I sat down, probably like a year later, and I'm like, okay, I think I have an idea of how he came to be. And I started playing around with maybe he was made in a different era where the technology was different and lost. Maybe everything about him is from a completely separate time. Basically, his creator, or the person who helped make him, for reasons either political or historical, are no longer accessible, which makes him incredibly unique and rare in the setting.
I like that.
And that's something that I didn't figure out until I kind of eased myself into what kind of setting we were making. Because throughout the campaign, depending on what my players took interest in and what directions they wanted to take, I took different creative liberties with the parts of the world that haven't been fleshed out yet. Because I knew that I could tailor them to things they would be more interested in. And that's kind of how the process of D&D having multiple authors in terms of its story is so fun and unique to the type of creative media. I actually just handed him a piece of like his backstory like 2 weeks ago.
Whoa.
Because those sort of ideas haven't fully formed and compressed themselves into something I was entirely sure of until just recently.
And this, just to get this clear for a sec, so the player playing the robot character didn't have any backstory for themselves, or did they not want to know, or did they just give you a blank slate, or how did that go?
So they gave me about when we started, they gave me about 2 paragraphs of backstory. It was where they came from, what they remember, and the characters, the people in their life that they knew, and why they set off on this adventure in the first place. So I had those like 4 details in my notes for a good long time, and as the story progressed, I would slowly fill in little details about all of them because we were exploring in a completely different part of the world. His details wouldn't come up in conversation unless I specifically prompted it. But now that the characters are finally heading in that direction, I of course have the onus to begin fleshing that out. And now I know exactly where each of these fit into the greater storyline that would leave a bigger impact. Not to kind of spoil to any D&D players that your DM doesn't exactly know what's going on in every place of the world at any given point in time. That's just kind of something they figure out along the way as necessary. It's kind of like, in those video games where the whole map is black and the player just, the main character just moves and fills out the map.
That's such a good reference. Yeah, that's exactly how it works. Yeah.
I actually listened to an episode of Adventuring Academy, which had both of my like 2 favorite DMs in the world, Matthew Mercer and Brendan Lee Mulligan. And they were talking about, as you flesh out your world and as you establish your continent and your setting, something really important is to know just enough about each part of the world that there are no areas of the world that are impossible to improv. So you can have like a spot where there's a mountain, a village, a couple monsters in the corner, but not necessarily what's in between. You just need enough around an area that you can improv what's in the area based on its surroundings.
Yeah.
And once you have that much information, the world is much easier to close in and finalize.
Right. Yeah. I'm also thinking maybe this is a sort of tangent here, but it's a really nice one, I think.
I mean, I don't have a second topic, so if you want a tangent,
sure. It's a side tangent
away.
It's a subtle tangent.
Yeah, of course.
But it really made me think of the way that I fleshed out like literally the entire west of the continent that my homebrew campaign is in now.
It just happens like that.
Because I did like one of my player characters and also players, because that's how it is, is super into nature and biology, and she does it all the time, and she loves animals, stuff like that. She plays a druid. So I thought, okay, let me make something nice here just for fun. I don't even care too much about animals, but I just thought she would love it so much. So I made a sort of merchant that sort of sold all kinds of exotic animals, and she also didn't quite know where she got them from. So
it's just a mystery.
You have to sort of imagine this sort of witch type, but sort of like nice grandma witch type.
As they are.
With like a bunch of rags, and she's like wobbling instead of walking, you know what I mean? And she has this cart that squeaks all the time, and there's like all these cages that are like connected to each other with rope, and they all sort of almost fall off, but not quite, that's kind of the vibe. And then I pre-made, so they would just sort of come across her as she was walking into the new city they were also traveling to. And she would have a bunch of animals. And naturally, my druid and also the other player characters, which I was quite happily surprised about, instantly like loved her and bought like half of her stuff, even though like they have no idea where they have to put these animals now. But well,
we'll worry about it later.
Yeah,
of course.
So I made for her like a list of, I don't know, maybe like 10 or something animals that either existed already in D&D or that I just made up. And the sort of point was that she also, like, she's super forgetful. There we go. So she doesn't quite know where they came from, or if they actually are dangerous, or if they're illegal or not. She just sells them. So as we were doing this sort of social interaction, because we were playing it live, right?
Of course.
And I don't know, I think my druid or something asked about the scorpion she just got out of a cage. And I was like, sure. The scorpion. Yeah, how wonderful. Yeah, I think I got it from a desert or something. I'm not sure. Is there a desert in the West? I think there's a desert in the West. And then afterwards I was like, what did I say? I have to remember all these things now. And sometimes some really nice stuff happened where I was like, this might come from like, there was also like a sort of demon type of mask that was there, I think.
Okay.
And then I was like, is this also from this desert? That makes sense, because then now I can make this clan that has a sort of aesthetic like this, or you know what I mean? So accidentally, a lot of the stuff from that continent really got figured out on the spot because I had to like play this weird old lady that sold exotic animals. That. It was so great. Yeah.
Okay. So this is probably something that I hope a lot of DMs relate with, because it's happened to me more than once.
Bring it on.
When you are kind of in the session, right, and your players have kind of gone in a direction that you haven't expected, and you just kind of have to make things up on the spot. Towards the end of my sessions, there's probably a strong hour or two of just improv, where there's just things I'm making up because out of necessity, of course.
Sure.
And then at the end of the session, when I turn off my mic because we play online, and I sit back in my chair and I think to myself, well, now I got to figure out how that makes sense.
Yes.
It's like, okay, time to figure out the world, the characters, the government, the agriculture, the animals that they met, where do these things happen? It's time to kind of reconcile those with the setting that I've made. And usually, more often than not, it kind of fits in well. But sometimes there's just something just a little bit strange. And you got to have to decide whether you have to toss that to the wayside or just go all in and integrate it.
Usually it's the last thing, though, for me, because I feel like you sort of have an obligation because you mentioned it in game, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Do you feel that too?
There's some DMs who are just very, very good at it. If anybody's watched, I'm just dropping a whole lot of Let's Play podcasts now.
Sure.
If you've ever watched NADPod, the DM Murph is amazing at just picking up the most random things the players bring up and somehow just shoving them into the world in a way that is funny and makes sense.
Right.
I remember in my campaign, one of the players offhandedly asked, is Half-Life 3 ever coming out? To like one of the all-powerful gods of the setting. And I'm like, okay, first of all, that's a joke. But second of all, let's roll with this. And I had the god saying, even I don't know the timeline of that.
I love it.
It's become just like a little segue inside joke that's run through the entirety of the campaign, which is goofy. But again, it's a world that you're writing with your players. There are no rules to how ridiculous things could be, except to suspension of disbelief. As long as your players continue to believe that this thing could be a viable living world.
Yeah.
That's all that really matters.
It's very true.
You're not trying to sell your story. You're not trying to make money off of this. This is literally a collaborative experience. So yeah, it's absolutely something that a lot of DMs have to do and put into the toolbox is the talent of dropping off little tidbits and clues of the world as the people travel. And then you don't really have to flesh them out. You just kind of have to drop them in there. Maybe a mention of a dragon in the east. Maybe someone wearing a strange bit of clothing, or they have a unique accent.
Yeah.
Having those there and then being able to tie that into the story later based on something you come up with at a separate time makes the world feel real and tangible. And your players can remember like, oh, remember when that happened way back when? I guess it ties into this now that we're going here.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not, your DM is not, I hate to break the veil here, like the Wizard of Oz. Your DM's not always omniscient. They didn't always plan that from the get-go. Sometimes it is a bout of creative spontaneity that they kind of roll with.
Yeah.
And it turns out into something really amazing.
Actually, I do want to say like one more thing about that, because it reminded me, the thing that you're saying, like just having some person wear a specific type of clothing or something, you know? Ever since I saw a really good video essay about it, about Avatar The Last Airbender, which is a great show. You should all watch it.
Of course.
They were sort of discussing an example of that way of world building, I would say, or that sort of specific kind of detailing that happened in one of the episodes. It was the episode of Zuko Alone, in which Zuko, who is sort of a castaway, sort of detaches a bit from his uncle that he travels with and goes on a sort of side trip. How do you say that? Words.
Like a venture.
Yeah, like a side venture on their own to sort of figure stuff out. And he's really tired. And there's a specific, beautiful, by the way, shot with like a lowering sun. And then you see Zuko traveling with their, well, horse, but not horse. They're walking along like a dusty road. This is a sort of Western setting, right? Or Western vibe. And then just one element on that road you can see in the foreground of the shot that's quite cinematic. You know, there's layers to it. In the foreground, you can see quite a large sort of element of earth that is specifically in a circle. And sort of that element of that ruined piece of earth bending in the foreground, they discussed it as like you can see just from this dusty road and this element in the front that there's like history to this place. Like at some point, some person had bended this element that eventually now is laying in ruins on this road that nobody has touched in, 40 years or something. And then the fact that Zuko, as the sort of quote unquote enemy, is traversing that old past is super interesting. And then you just need one, as you said, like only one person needs to wear a specific type of clothing, or there only needs to be like one specific war type of earthbending in the foreground that's just rotting away in the grass. And then that's all you need to know. And then you instantly feel that the sort of weight of history of the world that you're traveling through, I should say, with just having like one specific detail that you just place there. That's all you need to have this feeling of a larger scheme. And even if you, as the dungeon master or as the novelist or as the TV maker, video maker, don't know what that detail means, it can still make the world feel so large. And that's so cool. I love that stuff.
Yeah.
And Avatar does it really great, by the way. It's really good.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure we'll go on a couple of tangents about Avatar.
Probably.
On this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the benefits of that form of media is that they can gain the entire scope of the story they want to tell from the very beginning. And because of that, they can drop in these details throughout the series and eventually lead up to them, or not at all, and just leave them as a world. Like we've all seen the giant map of the Avatar world, which is beautiful, and that's all been planned out.
Yeah.
But when we look at something like D&D, it's a lot to ask your DM to have that whole thing planned out. And very often, more often than not, a lot of the things that you believe to be important at the very beginning of the campaign end up kind of falling to the wayside for things that your players eventually take interest in, which is an entirely new and different and actually pretty fun challenge that flesh out a world that kind of caters to your players and their interests and goals and achievements and things like that. But yeah. Did we answer the question? I forget.
I don't know, but we had a good discussion anyway.
Yeah.
Actually, this is a great segment, by the way, Dante, because you're talking about challenges and what we do, or what we at least try to do, and I think we're doing pretty good so far.
Good segue,
is that we're gonna? I know. That's why I jumped in like that.
Oh, you're such a professional.
I know, right? Hair flip. Yeah, perfect. But I got a prompt for you, buddy. I got a world building prompt.
Oh, I'm psyched. I'm ready.
Okay. Last week we talked about how rivers might flow upstream and what that would mean.
Sure.
And this week I was thinking, okay, maybe sort of small side tangent. I'm super into like dark academia, like boarding school stuff right now. I don't know why, but it's an obsession that I'm doing now. And I was
future
thinking,
topic, obviously. Yeah, cool.
We have to. Yeah, I might sort of force you to talk about this in the next episode, but we'll see. We'll see about that.
I'd be lying if that wasn't on my list for the next couple of episodes. But it's fine.
Beautiful.
It's fine. Let's
Beautiful.
We can talk about it. Something to look forward to. Next time on Your Rivers Are Wrong.
Yeah, this is
you heard it here first.
We should be careful with making promises like that.
If we don't touch that topic, I think it'd be a failure on our part. So
I mean, yeah,
eventually.
You're not wrong. Yes, that's true. Here's my prompt. Every person carries one magic source or sort of some way of doing magic, but twins or triplets have to share their source. And I wonder what that means or how that would influence relationships or maybe the way people study.
Interesting. So one of the, again, I'm going to tie this back to D&D because this is
Go for it, man.
kind of my field of know-how.
Sure.
In Dungeons and Dragons, there are 3 primary ways to gain magic. So there's sorcerers who have the magic innately. They're kind of born with it based on their race or their lineage. There are wizards who study for their magic. So they kind of pull apart the strands of the magic weave of the world and use it for their own benefit. And there's warlocks who ask a patron or another divine being or otherworldly being for power. So it's being born with it, studying it, and being gifted to it. So in a world where people have their own sources of magic, which I can imagine in sort of a high fantasy setting, some people have fire, some people have the power of flight, things like that.
Yeah.
But twins and triplets have to share it. Oh, that'd be so fun. In a situation where they kind of have the same pool of energy. So if you spend yours, then they don't have enough to go on for whatever they have to do. There has to be kind of a deal or a bargain made between the twins to be like, okay, so you use a little bit today. I kind of have a wizarding test later on, so please don't use too much for like getting to school, things like that. And triplets, it becomes even harder because what if you all can't agree, you know? I think that brings up a natural conflict. And probably a pretty easy storyline just from the get-go are twins that just don't agree with each other. On 2 different sides of a conflict, one would have magic for the progress of the world to help the people around them, but the other one has purely selfish desires to spend it changing the world in a way that they'd like to.
Right,
Pretty easy hero-villain dynamic there. But you also have to think about like what exactly is the source of magic. So say it comes from a patron, another worldly being that grants them both the same source of magic. Then it becomes which of the twins has their favor. Which one will be granted more power than the next? Or is it always
like
equal
that.
forever? You know, like what if your ability to tap into the magic is entirely based on how much you appeal to this magical deity? What if the patron is evil? And to tap into that magic, you have to be an evil individual. The good aligned twin will feel a bit slighted or a bit stunted because they can't tap into the super powerful evil necromancy powers that has been gifted to them because they don't want to. So what if it becomes a process of, I don't want to use my magic, but in order to prevent my evil twin from conquering the world, I have to use it.
That's interesting. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, because if I don't use it, then they will.
Then they have the opportunity too, because the pool is not empty yet. And okay, so how would you feel then about the difference between twins and sort of, I don't want to say normal people, because twins are normal people, but, you know, not twins? Like, would there be a sort of, I don't know, I can imagine there would be like, I don't know, discrimination going on, or that twins are fundamentally weaker or more trialed. Is that a word? Yeah.
Of course. There's a hierarchy that comes between them.
Guess so.
I think that would also put a certain sort of prestige for a set of twins who make it into some sort of higher ranking position or a spot of notability. Like, these 2 people are so powerful and they're twins. Could you imagine if they weren't?
Right,
like they could rule the whole nation. They could be the top dog. But a blessed be to the gods that they are split in 2. That we may never have to deal with their combined.
I love that. This is like a mantra almost.
Yeah. Oh, that is a fun concept.
That's interesting. I love that.
I like that. Thank you for the prompt. That is a cool idea, and I'll definitely sit on that. Absolutely. Write that down.
You know where it
later,
comes from? You know? It comes maybe they should be a separate prompt, but I'll tell you anyway. It comes from a story that I wrote when I was, I think, 14 or something, and it never worked out because it's super hard. But it wasn't specifically this, but it was a sort of twisted version of it where I would make, I don't know how I came up with this, but like the world would exist out of like people being twins only. And then there were 2 daughters born that weren't twins, and they felt so bad for themselves. Like nobody would accept them because they weren't normal. They weren't normal twins like everybody else.
Interesting.
So that they sort of braided their hair together and were like, oh yeah, no, we actually are twins. And then it's turned out into this whole lie, and I don't know. But it got super weird and I never finished it because it's got so confusing to think about every sort of result of that decision. But yeah, it was fun.
Please believe us. We've tied our hair together. There's no way we're not twins.
I know, right? Yeah. I was 14. Cut me some slack.
No, that's definitely anything better than what I made at that age. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. That was
that
was a fun one. Thank you for tuning in to Your Rivers Are Wrong podcast.
Yes. Thank you very much.
We are certainly attempting to have videos out like this once every week. Once weekly is our goal for the coming of 2022, which is in 4 days. 4 days we're going to be greeted with the new year.
Hooray.
So I hope you guys all had a very festive and safe holidays. With the new year comes new directions, new discoveries, new worlds. Thank you for visiting our podcast. And as always, your rivers are wrong.
Yep. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Your Rivers Are Wrong. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes that you'd like to hear us cover, feel free to contact us at yourriversarewrong@gmail.com. Our intro and outro music is written by Maarten Schellekens. Thanks for that. And again, thank you so much for listening. We hope to see you at the next one.